So originally, I had a title for my talk, and then I found out that it got called See Mr. Savant. But I'm going to be talking about some of the things that we've been doing with step adjustment in our regular walking controller, as well as some other things that we've been noticing on how hard heavy legs make walking. If you remember from last year, I showed videos of doing push recovery on a treadmill and kind of talked to how we do this. Well, since we're pulling off this, I'm going to give a quick overview. For that, we're just using the capture region with a few improvements. If you're not familiar, that's basically where the robot has to step in order to come to a stop. Then you can add constraints on the environment. So if you actually think about where the robot can step, you can pretty much just add a reachability area and find the intersection between that and the capture region, and that says where you need to be stepping. One of the things you can also do is, instead of just doing this over a single step, you can add it to do multi-step push recovery by looking up the multi-step capture region. One of the things that doesn't take into account that we want to exploit is we spent a whole lot of effort trying to make the robot, the kinematics of the robot, able to do crossover steps, and our reachability area is completely not taking that into account. So to do that, we can introduce some additional parameters, so things like crossover distance and crossover angle for both forward and backward. But the problem is this makes that capture region, or the reachability area, really non-convex. If you want to do simple math, you can't really get an intersecting area very easily. You can probably do that with some optimization, but we don't like to do that. So instead, we can just decompose this into 3 different regions. Then you can come up with some simple rules to figure out which one of those to apply. So, regularly we can say, okay, I have a capture region that intersects my base reachability area. Use that one. Great. If I don't, I can look for the region that does intersect the capture region, and then just use that one as my constraint. And if you then don't have an intersection at all, you can just pick the one that's closest, because that's heuristically going to be the best one. And then you can say, okay, well, I'm going to step as close as I can to my capture region. And if we apply this to the robot, it actually tends to work pretty well. It was kind of terrifying because I didn't do a very thorough job testing this in simulation before actually trying it on the robot, and then it worked. So I was pretty happy about that. We can definitely go further crossover than this. I don't know why, though it doesn't work in the other direction. So, one of the things though that we also want to do is not just consider walking on flat ground and doing push recovery on flat ground. We're trying to push more and more into rough terrain walking, so let's start thinking about how to do that. This is a video that was captured during our open house, so we did this a whole bunch, and if you remember from Sebastian's talk earlier in the week, we also hit that nice big rack right there while we were doing it. So for that, we can use this planar region environmental representation that we have, where we're taking single frames of a depth map and computing planar regions on each of those frames, all in the GPU. So we're actually getting this data at sensor rate, which is pretty great to have, environmental models at 30 hertz. You can then take those planar regions, get the convex hull of them, and add that as your constraint. So now you just say, okay, well, I have a more restrictive step kinematic reachability area, and we can then apply this on the robot. It doesn't actually do push recovery here, but it does do step adjustment a little bit on a couple of these regions, which is nice. From there, you can actually, we haven't done this in simulation, but you can extend this to have it do region changes based on, again, simple rules. So for that, you can think of, first, you can see that, I'll just kind of step through this. We have the robot, you have these desired footsteps being placed in the world. Looks like my animations are getting messed up. One of the nice things is that you have these convex constraints. It immediately pushes your footholds back into your environment. So you don't have to be as careful with saying, here's where my foothold goes. So that's right there. Then you can see that, at some point, your intersecting area gets pretty small between your capture region and the environment, and the robot can then say, okay, well, there might be something better. You can start a really quick search, and say, oh, there is something better out there that I should be stepping on. So then it switches the constraint region to this big, long piece of the environment. One of the challenges about this is you want to actually get the whole polygon inside of another polygon, so we have to do it as a little short QP online. To kind of start exploring some of the issues that Sylvain saw, for running, we actually implemented a simple jumping controller where it just does a stand, squat, extend, flight, land. This isn't, doing no model based. It's just saying, okay, I know what my takeoff height has to be. Let me just say a constant push-off force like what Sylvain ended up doing for running. And it works pretty well, but one of the challenges is really heavy legs, as he pointed out. And that fast extension and retraction causes a lot of angular momentum being induced to take off, and so then you start rotating your chest all over the place. So you can actually just add a simple gain in order to pitch the chest. That doesn't really work super well if you're jumping forward, because now you have momentum in the opposite direction. So you can add another gain, and it doesn't pitch the chest as much. And this is all the laziest way to do this. But it works decent on hardware. We had a couple of different runs, and that's the one that doesn't result in awesome shakies. And that's because I had too high of a gain on my center of mass control. But these are a couple times we ran it, and then the arms gave out, which is why we stopped having arms on the robot. I think that opens the question of how to handle angular momentum. There's a bunch of different things you can do for jumping, where you just say, control the arms directly to cancel it. That seems not readily extensible to a lot of things. You could hand it into this whole body MPC, like what one of our students, James Foster, is doing. However, this kind of gets pretty hard to get intuition as to how to control the robot out of it, and then using simpler MPCs like a single rigid body model doesn't really capture this. This is my last slide. So then, you can do the heuristically modeling angular momentum in, which is basically what I did, and then what Sylvain did. You can make the legs not so horribly heavy, like Josh is suggesting for earlier. I think that there's been some interesting work with like these ALIB models where they're starting to actually combine the momentum state into the point that you're controlling about, which to me is a lot more intuitive, because if you're simply standing there and your position is 0 and your center of mass velocity is 0, traditionally you'd say, oh, the robot's stable, but if it's rotating really fast, that's not captured at all in that stability metric, and you're going to fall. There's also this work that we've been doing, which is kind of coming up with something as this heuristic angular center of mass position measure, so that you can have like this frame that's a function of joint positions, but when you take the derivative of it, it's roughly equivalent to the angular momentum of the system. I think that that's kind of originating out from Howie Choset's work that he did a long time ago. But there's probably some other great ideas. So again, like Sylvain, if you want to talk about angular momentum, please come find me. We have a great team. This is old. I need to get a new picture. This is from last summer. And thank you.
2 minutes for questions.
Just to make sure I understand, you're complaining that the torso isn't heavy enough then?
Actually, yes. And I know, we did actually strap 100 pounds to the torso at one point. That was to test the knees. But yeah, I think that it's going to be somewhat of a self-solving problem as we put new arms and HBU, a battery on there. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing you get out of the torso is, you were talking about it's difficult to make the arms cancel everything, but it could be, if the torso is heavy, just not that much motion can get you a significant more amount of cancellation.
Yeah, once your inertia is packed into the torso, it's relatively small motions result in a 0 angular momentum or something.
Is this completely separate from the previous talk with the VID, or can you combine the capturability points with that?
I haven't looked a lot into the VID stuff. I think that you probably could, but at that point, you're mainly talking in a flight phase, so having it be as much of this convex hole on the ground, not as much, but you could probably take a lot of these similar environmental constraint things and tie them in there,
So you mentioned looking at planar regions and the overall multi-step capture region. And earlier you said it was kind of divided, and if the other region is outside either of the 3 ones, we just take the closest one. But
Yes.
in the case the closest one is in the empty void, or in the position that you are, would you not step, or what's the idea?
Yeah, pretty much you have to project it into the environment. So really you're taking your reachable area and you're picking the closest one that you can actually step on. You should be constraining that to also be within the environmental constraints. Realistically, I think the next step is to also incorporate the environmental constraints into the computation of the multi-step capture region. Because right now, we're doing that expansion assuming you can step anywhere in the reachable set, which you can't because you have these environmental constraints. All right, thank you.